There he is. We're back again together. Farhan Lalji on this Friday. Out of the gate, I want to ask you, Max Crosby.
Yeah,
I love the story, and I know it's already kind of almost been a week with this thing, but a guy that's covered a lot of football, you've been and out, you've talked to NFL GMs, you've been around. Have you ever dealt with it before? Obviously, he's at a different stage. He's one of the top defensive players in the league. But have you ever seen this before, where someone does say, "Didn't pass physical, bro"?
Yeah, it has happened before in the NFL. It's happened a few times with the Baltimore Ravens. And I mean, we've seen these situations where during this conversation period, players moving on. And, we're guilty of reporting these things before the deals are actually signed as well on the CFL side, once their tampering window opens. And the odd time, guys flip, right? Like I remember Ricky Foley was going to, he was going to come back to BC, and then he made a change and decided to go back to Toronto. And, it wasn't injury related or anything like that, but like these things do happen. And there's certainly a lot of people in Baltimore that they're around the league, not necessarily in Baltimore, but there's people around the league that think this was a level of gamesmanship, right? That they went after Crosby. Now the Ravens have said we wanted to go after him and Hendrickson, but that would have been a lot of money invested in two defensive ends. And then all of a sudden, they're able to pivot, right? And so they say, okay, you're not healthy, and now you get Hendrickson signed to a much more friendly deal. I get why people are raising their eyebrows. And from a Raider perspective, they're able to fit him in under the cap. But they went out and got two edge players, right? So now it kind of becomes redundant that you're spending the money the way you spent it. Would both of those players have signed knowing that Crosby was coming back, right? So, we'll see what it ends like. It doesn't feel like this story is over, but the fact that we've got to this point has been interesting. And, when you listen to Crosby now, it looked like their relationship was broken. When they sat him for those final two games last season, he wasn't happy about it. He was more than open to a trade, and now he's like, hey, I'm a Raider, I'm back, and sounds excited about
it. I wonder if Tom Brady has anything to do in this and being like, hey, Max, Tom here, we're sorry, but we want you.
Could be. I think Brady's going to get more and more involved by not just the year, by the week, really. Especially, given how poor the team was a year ago and where they're at now, and they've got a chance to rebuild and reset with a foundational piece of quarterback in this draft, right? So I think he's going to be a part of those decisions. And if he had a conversation with Crosby and said, "Look, what happened before? That was you and Pete. It's a different regime now. At least different head coach. I'm going to be a bit more involved. You're the guy." I don't know that that's happened, but it's certainly not beyond the realm of possibility. And then, look, if you're the Raiders, you better say that, because you're not getting 2 first-round draft picks from somebody else for them, given what's happened, right? Like your negotiating position, if you want to trade, has been absolutely gutted. So I wouldn't want to move him for 1 first-round pick, right? So you want to find a way to make it work because he's an impact player.
Let's try and fast forward to November. Because, around Thanksgiving, American Thanksgiving, it's kind of the meat and the potatoes of the thing. Where do you think Crosby's playing?
Well, look, I think if he's a Raider at that point, once the season kicks off, I think he's going to be a Raider until the end of the season. Right? I do. Now, there's still talk of other teams. I know the Bears desperately need pass rushing help. I know they can't afford them. The Eagles are in the conversation because they lost a player already as well. And the Cowboys, of course, right? And they're a team that can fit him in, and they definitely need an impact guy and the name value that comes with a player like him, especially after you lose Micah Parsons at the start of last season. So I don't think the Bears are going to happen, but could the Eagles happen? Potentially. Could the Cowboys happen? Potentially. But again, they're going to try to lowball now, right? So the Raiders probably just sit and wait on this. And if he starts the season, now if the Raiders are awful again and out of it by the time you get to U.S. Thanksgiving, then all bets are off, right? They may look to move on from some of these players and eventually get a high pick. But failing that, and I shouldn't say failing that. That's quite possible, given what the rest of that roster looks like, despite all their moves. So, you never know.
Sticking with the Raiders, do you think that we see Kirk Cousins in black and silver?
Potentially, I know that he's waiting a little bit too to see what happens with Aaron Rodgers, and I think people around Pittsburgh believe that Rodgers is going to come back. But it does make a lot of sense, right? I mean, that roster is flawed, and if you put Fernando Mendoza into it, even as the number 1 overall pick, that might not be the best scenario for his development. And if you're Tom Brady, you probably see that more than anybody else. I mean, Brady is the guy that is not a fan of today's college football, right? And today's quarterback development. So if he thinks that, we need to keep this guy in a professional football setting, have him learn a professional football offense, and then, put him in at the right time and maybe find a way to just play him a little bit later in the season and things like that. I mean, if there's a guy that believes in that type of development, as opposed to throwing a guy to the Wolves right away, I think it's Tom Brady. So I think it makes sense. It's just going to depend on what the number is, because you're not going to be paying Mendoza much. So if you if you wind up getting if you wind up getting Cousins, it does make some sense. But that roster's got some other holes. So what does Cousins come in at, right? I mean, it's not like Kyler Murray, right, where he's getting paid $35 million by the Cardinals and he'll settle for a veteran minimum. I don't think Cousins does that. So if you've got to pay north of $10 million, could that money be spent elsewhere?
Yeah, that's kind of the point that I wasn't really thinking of too, or when I was thinking of, I'm like, that's who's going to want that. NFL free agency, what else has jumped out at you? What else do you like?
Well, like being around the Seahawks the way I am, I got to be honest, I like the moves they didn't make, right? I was hoping they would get one more of their DBs in instead of 3 of their top 6 out the door. But really, this team's only lost 2 starters from last year's Super Bowl team. Can you find 2 starters in the draft? You should be able to, even though they've only got 4 selections, right? But they should not have paid Kenneth Walker close to $15 million that the Kansas City Chiefs are doing, right? I mean, people are going to be enamored because if you haven't watched Seattle and you watch those playoff games in the Super Bowl, of course you want Kenneth Walker. But I've had a chance to watch this guy for 4 years, and I see something else, right? I see I see injuries. I see a player that hasn't necessarily been consistent. I see a player that was part of a 2-headed monster during last year, and that's when he was most effective, until the end. I see a player who doesn't necessarily run inside as well as some other guys in some situations. So I just don't think he's worth that. Now, I was surprised that they went out and paid Rashid Shaheed what they did, $17 million a year for a returner and a wide receiver 3. I'm not feeling that, but the fact that they maintain some discipline, and we'll see if they can find, some pieces in the final ends of free agency, or if they've got the ability to go make a trade, because they've certainly got some cap space. So I like what I saw there. And the Rams, they kind of got 2 DBs from the Chiefs, including Trent McDuffie, to fortify that position group, which Sam Darnold certainly exposed. So I thought there were some teams there. And to be honest, I think the team that's improved as much as anybody is the San Francisco 49ers, right? Like, they got some big names, and they've been so up against it cap-wise in the last couple of years. They haven't been able to do that, right? They've had the highest paid player in 7 of 9 positions going into last year. Now they've got some flexibility. So the NFC West, if you thought it was good this year, boy, wait till next year. It's going to get even better.
Yeah, no, it's like D1, D2, D3, club league stuff. Do you Rams are still up there as one of the favorites to win the Super Bowl out of the gate? Do you like that?
Absolutely. I had them as my favorite coming in, and it was fun watching the Seahawks do what they did. But when you look at that roster and the pieces that they've got, on both sides of the ball, I think it's a really good team. And where they've had to rebuild the most is defensively, and that's where the deficiency in draft picks has really kind of hurt them. But I think last year they got closer, right? And they've addressed their need positions. And Sean McVay is an outstanding coach. There is no reason for the Rams to take a step back. They were that close a year ago. They'll be right there again. There's
some good value, though, on the futures for Super Bowl. It gets me giddy to think. And I'm like, maybe a guy should just put down, a little bit on the Bears. You never know. Or the 49ers. Yeah, there's some value there. I was looking through your social media and your Twitter today. It's Farhan Lalji joining us for the Cooperators. What can you tell me? Is it Callum or Callum Wither?
Callum Wither, who was the first-team All-Canadian quarterback last year in U Sports. So he spent 3 years at the University of Ohio, backing up Curtis Rourke primarily. And he might have even been there for Nathan for 1 year. So he was there from 22 to 24. I believe he got his degree after 3 years as well, but just never got on the field. And so decided to come back and go to Laurier and just blew up last year. He was outstanding. He took over for Taylor Elgersma and, dare I say, didn't miss a beat, right? He led the nation in passing touchdowns and was named first-team All-Canadian. And, I think he always wanted to scratch that itch in the NCAA. Now, can he do that, right? When you look at Maryland, they've got a good young quarterback that still has time left and is a player that they're excited about, right? That's got, a dynamic quarterback, Malik Washington, that can take off and use his legs and do some good things as well. So I don't know that he's going to necessarily get to the field, but he'll be close, right? Because, those type of quarterbacks tend to get hurt. A lot of college teams use more than one over the course of a year, and there's a potential for him to appeal and maybe get a second year, get one of those Ohio years back. So he did great in U Sports. He'll go to the NCAA, and then after that, I'm sure we'll try the CFL, and we'll have every opportunity to do so. He's a talented kid. He's come out here. He's worked with Rob Williams, who coaches the Rourkes in the summer. My son's thrown with him a little bit, and just a great kid, and I'm glad he's getting another opportunity down south.
So sorry, so he spent 3 years NCAA, then he went up to Laurier for a year, so he's been in school for 4. Sounds like a smart kid as well. Now he's going back to try things at the University of Maryland with the Terps, and then there's a possibility he could appeal for even another year.
Well, his first year was a red shirt at Ohio, right?
Okay.
So technically, when he finished his 2024 season, he was a red shirt sophomore at Ohio. So he came up here, used an additional year. So by U.S. standards, he's a red shirt senior now, like a 5th-year senior. But he could potentially get one of those other years back if he appeals it based on injury. I know that can be tricky from time to time. Trinidad Chambliss is going through that right now. So we'll see. But just the fact that he's going to get a chance this year, I think, is pretty cool. And G-Roy Simon is the GM of Maryland football.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Because I've personally never heard of that, where a kid goes NCAA to U Sport, back to NCAA in any sport.
Yeah. No, you're right. Like, to make both those moves back across, that's a rarity. So it's a first for me. I mean, we've seen guys, Akeem Messidor and who's the cornerback? I'm drawing a blank right now. Dean Leonard, that played at University of Calgary and then left during COVID, and Tavion Robinson. And so there are guys that have gone from U Sports to the NCAA, but not necessarily guys that have started there, come back, and gone back, right? So it's interesting that he's taken that leap.
I wanted to ask you, I saw that the Riders are having some open tryouts down south, southern United States, starting, I think it's around April, late March into April here. I don't know how many you've been around or talking to teams and all that. Why are these so valuable? How do they work? Obviously, there's been some names that have come out of these.
Yeah, most teams probably will have 2 to 3 guys in their roster every year that they find in these U.S. camps. So, you get a chance to go down there, and guys are kicking the tires, and they might not know a lot about the Canadian Football League, and then all of a sudden they learn this is available, and they're like, yeah, I'll pay my $100 and go try out. And, they unearth some guys. Certainly a lot of guys show up that don't belong in a professional setting. But at every one of these camps you go to, and most teams will do 5 or 6 of these throughout the U.S. in different regions, you'll probably find a couple of guys at every one of those camps that you want to sign and bring to your training camp, right? And you'll unearth some guys, right? And a lot of teams will take guys that are on their neg list, and they'll steer them to those camps if they're ready to sign, just so they can get an early evaluation and get to know them a little bit. So there's a lot of value to these things, and plenty of diamonds in the rough. There are, tens of thousands of football players in the United States. You can't find them all, but they tend to find some. I got to double check. I think the Riders got Joe Robustelli out of one of those.
I think they did as well. Yeah, I think it'd be a nice little docuseries. Going and starting from where the guy shows up in a parking lot in his cleats and grays, as we used to call them, and runs around, does something, and then, next step. And then just to follow that journey would be so fun. I wanted to ask you, and this is just a curious fan and curious about the league, where do you think Taylor Elgersma's playing football next year? What is he doing?
You talking about this coming season, 2026?
Yeah.
I think he'll kick around the NFL and maybe halfway through the season decide to sign with Winnipeg. I just don't know that he's more marketable today than he was a year ago. This is not a commentary on Taylor Elgersma, the player. I think he's an outstanding player, and I was really impressed with what he did at Packers camp last year. So again, this is not me saying he can't play in the NFL. I'm not saying that. I just don't know that the opportunity gets bigger this year than it did last year, having been out of football for a year, right? So I would imagine that he'll continue to do what he can over the course of this year, but at some point this year, I think he'll wind up signing with the CFL and seeing where that takes him.
I sometimes sit there and think and be like, if we can fast forward things 10, 15, 20 years down the road, who's the player? How do they break the branding to where it's like, you got to look at these Canadians now. You got to give these Canadians a shot, right? It just seems like they just can't break through. Especially at the quarterback position, more than anything, they just can't break through.
Yeah, Barney, truthfully, I'm not sure that's the case, because you're seeing more and more Canadian players get opportunities in the NFL every year. You're seeing more and more going to NCAA schools and getting those opportunities as well. So quarterback, you're right, though. I will totally give you that. It is so difficult for a quarterback, particularly a U Sports quarterback, to get a reasonable opportunity down there. I mean, it's, yeah, and with Nathan Rourke coming from a Group of 5 school, even that was tough, right? Like, you need the Curtis Rourke alignment where you can play at a major school at some point, like he did at the University of Indiana, and he probably would have gotten drafted higher had he not been injured and was able to go through that whole offseason process. But, coaches can and scouts, like, you can stand on the table for your guy, and that works at other positions. But when you get it wrong at quarterback, guys get fired. Right? Like, you don't get it wrong by getting one offensive lineman into camp. That's okay. But you can't do that at the quarterback position. There is just too much at stake for these teams. So I think it's going to be really, really difficult at that position. I don't think it changes. But I do think in the other positions, doors are a little more open than they have been previously.
Hockey wise, what's post-trade deadline, post everything like for the Canucks there? Are they still playing? Are they playing it out since they paid their fees? They're just going to play the rest of the games out?
Yeah, good analogy. I think they're playing better now, and this is common for a lot of teams.
Oh, yeah.
When you know what your lot is, you're out of it, and the trade deadline is gone, and that's a weight off everybody's shoulders. So, Brian Burke always used to say, don't get fooled by what happens with 20 games to go for a team that is out of it, right? Because those are empty calorie games. And when teams play you, they don't take it as seriously. You saw that with the Nashville Predators last night. I talked to Barry Trotz during the game, and he's just like, we don't even deserve a point. We are just going through the motions out there, and they're 20 points up on Vancouver in the standings and 2 points out of a playoff spot. So it happens that way. So while I don't think a team can get full of themselves based on results, I do think it can help players. And the Canucks need some players to gain confidence going into the offseason because, Elias Pettersson hasn't scored in 19 games. Brock Besser had 1 in 26. Now he's got 5 in his last 10. So there are guys that are kind of coming out of the dark ages and back into it. So it can help individual players. You might be able to establish trade value for some players and, yeah. It's good. Just don't read too much into it.
I think I heard, was it today? I was listening somewhere and I almost fell off my chair. Pettersson ends up with the Leafs. And I was like, oh boy.
Yeah. The guys on Overdrive in Toronto have been talking about that, given how bad Austin Matthews has been. But Matthews has been bad for half a season. Pettersson's been bad offensively for 2 full seasons plus. So I can't imagine the Leafs would want to go there. But, we'll see what Pettersson decides this offseason. Hopefully he can rebuild some value and that the Canucks can find a taker. And I don't say that as a media guy trying to run the guy out of town. I just think a change is best for both sides. I think it would help the player too.
Do you do anything? Do you get any assignments for March Madness at all for TSN?
I used to. I haven't done March Madness in quite some time. My daughter is all over me to get involved in the women's side of March Madness. She's gotten into high school basketball and she is a huge fan. But I watch it, but I don't like. To be truthful, like I'm like most casual college basketball fans. I am not turning it on during the regular season, but I will turn it on for the tournament for sure because that's must see TV. It's a lot of fun.
All right, man. Thanks for doing this. Again, great piece on Wither there. I think that's just fascinating. I can't wait to watch how this plays out. Appreciate you. We'll chat again next week.
Take care, buddy. Have a good weekend.